being an accountant is an amazing way to start being an IT person because you actually understand what's happening on the other side of the table. I'm glad VB had just been introduced when I was programming. VB was my jam. The first release of this project will be in 3 years. 3 years. Nothing we do in technology should have a first release in 3 years.
But throughout your career, what leaders have you had that you've been inspired by?
The first one who I ever saw it and went, oh my God, that's what leadership looks like, was Shane Elliott, who's now the CEO of ANZ. I was walking through Bangalore Airport. I tripped over and I had a major injury as a result. Ended up having to take several months off to try and look at non-surgical options. Ended up having major surgery. Took another 3 months off to recover from the surgery. When I came back into the office, there was a restructure. I'm like, you can deal me out, please. I want to go and do something else.
Today, we are joined by Euan Walker, a seasoned tech and product leader with a remarkable 27-year career dedicated to solving customer problems and driving business success. Euan's experience spans across complex technology delivery, innovative product design, and leading transformative organisational change on a global scale. Euan has made his mark at several prestigious companies, including CGU, Infosys, ANZ, Verency, and most recently with Judo Bank. In his roles within banking and consulting, Euan has often been the go-to leader for turning around troubled areas, bringing a creative, fun approach to inspire teams and achieve exceptional results. His focus on developing high-performing teams and truly meeting customer needs has been the cornerstone of his success. Okay, so Euan, thank you for joining me today.
Pleasure.
I really am looking forward to learning about your story. From what I've researched, it's pretty interesting. It's different places in the world and sort of startups and big corporates. So a very kind of eclectic background. Really looking forward to unpacking that with you. But I'd really love to find out where it all began. So what were you kind of thinking? What was the plan coming out of high school? And how did you end up where you are, I guess?
So coming out of high school in the nerdiest possible way, I intended to become an accountant. I wanted to be an auditor. I liked the idea of doing specifically restructure work. I like the idea of bankrupt companies or ill-performing about how they bring in people to try and help turn them around. I thought, I want to do that.
Yep.
Which was great, except...
What inspired that?
I've absolutely no idea. Yeah. It's just an idea that was there from kind of year 10, year 11. My group of friends mostly were doing kind of commerce-y type subjects, so that was the plan. Hilariously, that group of friends now includes an Air Force officer, a high school principal. None of us actually ended up working in finance. And I didn't do particularly well in year 12.
Yeah.
So just put it mildly. So really was not the marks I was hoping to, and I ended up going to kind of a second-tier university campus, doing accounting.
Yep.
But when I got to university, I kind of was primed to, I want to do all of the things that you can do. I wanted to really have the university experience. But it was a small kind of semi-regional campus, not a lot of activities. And so I threw myself into all the student union stuff, clubs, societies, student politics. I got very involved in student politics for a couple of years. And out of that, I did the degree, and I probably didn't do particularly well in my accounting degree either. And I did some internships at Big Four firms through that process. And I kind of realized, not for me. This is not a path I want to take. These are not firms I really think I want to work at. And 13, 14 years in auditing to become the potential for an audit partner role. I'm like, this is not me. So rather than give up, I finished the accounting degree, and the subjects I was good at were all the IT subjects. So and I was always a bit nerdy. So I went and did a master's degree in IT, information systems, and doing systems design and so forth. So not coding, but more architecture and design type stuff. And that was amazing. And I absolutely loved that. And whilst I was doing that, I got a part-time job building databases for small businesses. And actually, I really, really like this. This is fun. I enjoy the challenge of it. This is fantastic. So I did that, and then when I graduated, I really was incredibly lucky. The first kind of big corporate job I got was working for what was then Commercial Union Insurance, what was now CGU.
Yep.
And the person who hired me, when I went in to do the interview, we spent the entire time talking about all this other stuff that I'd done at university. So I'd produced plays for the Fringe Festival, for example. Oh, wow. And so really interesting sort of experiences that you don't typically get when you're kind of 19. And his view was, well, you're a smart kid with an interesting view on life and you don't know what's not possible. So I'm going to bring you into the team and I'm going to have you just randomly solve my random problems. And so, when we've got an unknown, we're putting in my first job, we're putting in an imaging and workflow system for claims management. We've bought a big $1 million scanner, but no one's worked out how you get a document from the mailroom through the scanner and into the system. The go live date's in 3 months. Can you work that out for us and solve that whole problem? And so that was my kind of first corporate job, was this very random problem solving job.
Yeah, right.
And at that point, I was totally hooked. That was everything I loved about it, because it was very much solve the problem, get us on the right track. We have no particular view about how we should do this. Let's just leap right in. So the original plan, was not in IT at all.
See, it's interesting because as you were talking, I was reflecting on numerous things, but one of those was I was trying to tally up in my head the number of Titans we've had on the show that essentially year 12 didn't go to plan.
Yep.
Let's put it that way. And they kind of found themselves coming out of high school and not really sure where to go, what to do, and kind of found themselves in this world of tech through some path of some description.
Yep.
But it's interesting when you look at that, because you think there's so much pressure put on kids around year 12 and relatively inexperienced. And the reality is most of the jobs that you probably have done since didn't exist when you were coming out of high school.
Absolutely.
Yet you've ended up being very successful in those jobs and kind of following your curiosity and your intellect and all the other skills that you've got that have kind of got you there. So I guess the takeaway from that is don't sweat it. Year 12,
absolutely.
Come out, find something that's going to give you that continuity of learning and experiences. And I think people do think about universities coming away with a certificate and a qualification in something, but it sounds like it was much more holistic than that for you.
Absolutely. I came out with all the experiences, and it's the experiences that have stood me in really good stead. That being said, being an accountant is an amazing way to start being an IT person, because you actually understand what's happening on the other side of the table. I think is a real challenge that some of the graduates we get who come out of pure IT degrees, who have done only the most vague introduction to IT systems, when they come to work in finance particularly, like they come on and you're like, okay, well, we're doing a general ledger, so that's credits and debits and so forth, and there's a structure of accounts. What's that? You're like, okay, we've got to break this down. Oh, we're doing a loan. Well, these are the elements of the loan. This is how it's all got to be accounted for. And you kind of skip that and realizing, actually, I have to take you back and teach you first year banking and finance to do that. So I think it's an odd thing that I would almost encourage the if you're going to do big corporate IT, the combination of the business degree and the IT degree is a fantastic combination. That being said, I suspect decreasingly relevant these days in terms of the volume of time that you'd end up spending at university.
Yeah, potentially. Again, it's interesting, isn't it? Again, as you're saying, that's reflecting, thinking, people that are at your kind of level now, what you've achieved, probably didn't do a computing degree, or very few did, because they didn't necessarily exist. I remember speaking with Gavin Wood about this, and I forget the year he graduated, but I did the research, and that year only 1,000 people in Australia graduated with a computer degree, or computing degree of some description. So it's still fairly few and far between.
There's definitely comp-sci degrees at my university, at my campus.
Yeah.
But they were all very hardcore maths. It was back in that day.
Yeah.
They're maths, you're doing this, and you're going to build, really complex systems. The idea of the sort of people who could survive or thrive in a no-code world where you need to understand the concepts rather than, being able to hold memory addresses and so forth. That change, I think, in the industry has really allowed people who wouldn't have necessarily succeeded through that discipline to go well. And I'm not sure how I would have gone in a pure comp-sci degree. Back in the day, maths was okay, but when I started to do postgrad programming, my programming was... I'm glad VB had just been introduced when I was programming. VB was my jam. So to, of course, any real developer or engineer who's looking at this, they'll just cringe at that idea. But that was where I cut my teeth. It's where I learned to do things. I learned structures and so forth. But I'm not sure I could have ever done anything like what I see my own engineers do these days. I think the way they work, their talent is just absolutely amazing.
Absolutely. But they've, I guess, the benefit now of years of code being developed in different languages, those experiences moving probably across different codes. I guess it is like physically learning a language in many ways, and the kind of translation between the two, right? As in
absolutely
multiple now exist. I'm interested in when you first came into CGU, how did your expectation of work meet how did the reality of work meet the expectation?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I had any idea what a corporate environment really was like. I'm the first member of my family to finish high school and then go to university.
Yep.
So I knew no one else who worked in big companies.
Yep.
Most of my cousins are tradies of some sort. A couple of them are bank clerks. But I had no one to really have that conversation with.
Yeah.
Even my parents' friends were typically, academics. So I didn't have a solid expectation of what it was. It was more, what you take away from watching movies. That was probably as close as I actually got. And thinking about, share trading, which is where my friends wanted to go.
Yeah.
And that's the environment. So I don't think I really actually had a solid expectation. Yeah. And I have to be honest, I think that actually probably helped me a lot because I didn't know what was the right behaviours. Now, I remember there's been some real moments of trepidation. You don't know what you're supposed to do and say. How are you supposed to work with your boss? When I'd worked in a small consulting firm, the boss was incredibly laid back. He was a sales guy and he would just throw work over the fence and just want it delivered. And he didn't really understand that much of what we were doing, I don't think. And I kind of look at that going, I don't really know what I would have expected. And that probably helped. And having a really good supportive boss and team around me when I first transitioned, who were quite gentle, I think, really, really made it an easy transition well outside any sort of graduate program. So I was taking proper in the deep end roles straight out of uni.
Yeah, fantastic. I saw after about 3 years in that role, you did the natural thing, you headed to the US.
Yep.
How did that come about?
I wanted to go somewhere different. I kind of was already doing some really interesting stuff, but I was running out of opportunities at CGU. I wanted to go and move on to something else. The team I was working with was really, really awesome, but kind of collectively we were all a little bit... all they're doing now is mergers and acquisitions, so there's not a lot of really new stuff.
Yep.
And let's go and do something different. And the whole team actually were getting ready to leave en masse to go and do different jobs. And I decided I'd take the opportunity to move overseas. And I was really a case of whatever came up first. Am I going to go to the UK or am I going to go to the US? And I had no particular preference. And I saw an ad for this company out of San Francisco that was hiring people to work in strategy and architecture consulting. And they were a startup. There was equity. And I'm like, I'll do that.
Yeah, wow.
Rocked up, did the interview at the Novotel in the city. And 6 months later, my visa came through and I packed up and moved to San Francisco.
I mean, that's incredible because that would have been late 90s, early 2000s.
98, I was doing the interview, yeah.
It's a Silicon Valley and so forth wasn't, I'm assuming, a concept. I mean, Facebook and so forth wasn't...
It was I was aware of it,
okay.
But it was the .com bubble would hit 3 months after I landed.
Of course.
So much for that fame and fortune. But I was already what you would now call chronically online. So I was already very aware of pets.com and Webvan and all of those as they were starting to come up. So I was aware of what was going on there and it sounded exciting from over here.
Yeah.
But back then it wasn't through internet. It would have been through reading Wired magazine or something like that, really showing my age. And that all seemed like a really exciting adventure. So I packed up, I went over and,
amazing.
2 very interesting years.
How did that... I guess you're still relatively new into your career, but how did your experience of working in America compare with your experience of working in Australia?
It was really different. Now, my company was unusual in that the vast majority of the staff weren't American. They were predominantly, all of the technical team were either Australians, Indians, or from the UK.
You're right.
It's just very, very weird. All of our sales managers and our project managers were American, but everyone else were. I don't know why this was the case, but it was a very odd culture. As a result, it wasn't like you were joining an American firm; you were joining an international firm.
You're right.
And so I had this really good mix of cultures. It was a fantastic group of people, but also it was a group of people where everyone was away from home. So there was a kind of quite a collectivist spirit and supportive spirit amongst the team. So that was kind of odd. I'm not sure I've actually ever had the experience of working purely in an American firm. Even one of my clients was Chase Bank in New York. And you would go to Chase, but half the people in the room were consultants from other firms who were all recent immigrants within the last 2 years. But it was an amazing experience just from a personal development perspective.
Yep.
one of my parents has recently passed away, and I was sorting through all of their papers, and I found emails that I'd sent them when I was first over there, kind of asking the question, maybe 2 months in, have I made a mistake?
Yeah.
Everything I've given up, that I've left my friends here. Have I really made the right choice? And that, I think, was kind of really symbolic of a time in my life where I'm like, I'm going for this adventure, but I'm not sure the adventure met the expectation. And then post September 11th, the company closed its San Francisco office and gave me a couple of choices on what I wanted to do. And I'm like, I think I'll go home, thanks.
Did you remember sending those emails?
I do. It was just interesting going through and actually Dad had printed them out, and they were literally in a folder.
Yeah.
And one of them was very much, I think I left a relationship here, and I thought, I think I've made a mistake. And about 3 months after that, I literally called up one day and said to my now wife, I think I've made a mistake. Will you marry me? Will you take me back? And she said, yes, absolutely. So I ended up flying home to get married. And if nothing else, out of all the things that happened in America, it being the trigger for me to finally realise, yes, actually,
it's the epitome of the saying, the absence makes the heart grow fonder.
And it did indeed. And it did indeed.
Living proof. So I was going to ask why you came back to Australia, but clearly 9/11 was the trigger for that, and love in combination. And you joined Infosys.
I did. I actually didn't join Infosys. I had spent my first 2 years of married life, I spent all that time on the road. And so my wife said, well, can you get a job that has less travel, please? So I joined a local firm called Expert Consulting, long gone. And 3 months later, it got bought by Infosys.
Got it.
And all of a sudden, I found myself at a senior manager at a firm I would have never gone to work for, because I promised, small company, they had 400 people. And I was running some of the good-sized projects at Telstra, real fun team, really good people. And then I was at Infosys, and I really enjoyed my time at Infosys. The leadership team who came in when they first took over Expert and really broadened up Australia, I thought were quite good. But it was also my first real introduction to working with Indian teams in earnest as an onshore, offshore kind of thing. And whilst there was the interesting cultural learnings as you kind of normalise, there's some amazing people in that firm.
Yeah.
And actually at the end of my time there, they wanted me to move overseas to stay with Infosys and take up some more senior roles. But my wife had just got her dream job as the head of HR of one of the big credit unions.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's okay, your career wins.
Yeah.
So I will go and get a short-term job over here, and you can have your dream job, and we'll see if that works, and that takes priority.
Yeah, great.
My short-term job was ANZ, which was not so short-term, and she didn't love her dream job. But that was, I think, a really, really important moment in the career of going, yep, I'm going to have to rely on the fact that I'm going to be able to find another great opportunity somewhere else, and it's not just the company that I love and that they wanted me to do stuff. I've got to rely on the fact I'm going to be able to find that somewhere else too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm interested, what did that time in consulting teach you about tech?
When I first joined the firm, I went to Telstra, and my first day I was asked to take over a project. And I was given the project brief. I was literally physically handed the requirements document, which was in a binder. And I was told the project had a hard deadline 3 months later due to some large intercompany contractual commitments. And the project was months and months and months behind, if not possibly a year. And I remember looking at this and I said, has anyone read this document? Like, it's not signed off. I'm looking for a sign-off page. It's not signed off. No, I don't think we've got sign-off yet. And it's due in 3 months. Okay. Who's the sponsor of the project? Who's driving this on the business side? So there's a person from Telstra who came in. I said, can you explain to me what we're trying to achieve? And she described it to me, and I'm drawing it up on a whiteboard. And I said, have I kind of got it? She's like, yeah. I said, awesome. Can you sign the bottom of that? She's like, sure. Puts her name there. Blank sheet. Designed up what it could look like. And I said, would that solve your problem? Yeah. I said, can you just sign that? Like, awesome. And I picked up the folder and I threw it in the bin. I said, no one's ever going to read this. You could start today and not sign off this document before the go live date. So we're going to do this. And I had a developer in my team, a guy called Feroz, who is just a rock star, and a tester called Jerry, a couple of other people who were around. And we built this solution, and it was done in 6 weeks. Now, this was supposed to be an impossible project. Doing it in 3 months was supposed to be impossible. And what I walked away from was an absolute kind of clear demonstration that methodologies are all good and well. The processes we're supposed to follow are all good and well. But ultimately, as IT professionals, we're there to solve a problem. And that problem isn't just about a massive requirements document. It's a problem that says, I need something done in a particular size by a particular time frame. And a lot of other stuff becomes really flexible after that. And some of the work I'd done in America, we'd gone and done work with really fast-growing companies. And they were doing things like, did work in a silicon company. We need to have an online ordering system that operates in every language where our customers are, because we do global shipping. And we're losing business to Intel. So we need that every day. It's not live. We're losing $100,000 of sales, which means every other rule goes out the window. Running fast is the only rule that mattered. And they didn't care about any amount of dropping to the floor process. They needed to capture the orders. And so when I came into Telstra, there was that sort of kind of view. And that project was successful. Like, the stakeholders like, this is awesome. This is amazing. You didn't sit down and ask me to fill in a 200-page document. I'm like, why would I? Your problem was really simple. And that was really, for me, the underpinning of a good relationship and an honest relationship with someone who's got a problem. Developers being in the room to hear it firsthand and being able to solution on the spot. The flexibility to say, what are we really here for? And then the ability to execute on that and bring in the rest of the company. I mean, it wasn't just 3 of us. The whole team of kind of build engineers and so forth able to do that. But it really taught me, challenge every assumption and be flexible, and then you're able to achieve these really great things. And that, to me, I put that at the start of the successful career in leading turnarounds on projects, but also on really delivering. And it was a real clarifying moment to say, I've read the methodology book, it's great, but sometimes we need to focus a little bit harder.
It's interesting, given that your upbringing was predominantly around academics, that actually you got away from the theory and into the.
So my around academics is a little bit different. So my father was a truck driver.
Oh yeah, okay.
And so he left school when he was 14. He left school. He was a miner from 14 to 18. He did his national service in the UK. He came out here. He drove trucks. The family immigrated after the war. He drove trucks here. He went and worked in Canada as a miner, and then came back and was driving trucks again. And had always known that education was really important. And he got into an argument with his younger brother. And his younger brother said, if education's so important, why don't you get one? So at 30, he sold his truck, went back to the UK, talked his way into a university, became an engineer. And he was an applied engineer. So he was very hands-on. Even when he was an academic, he was the head of school of applied engineering. So everything is about physical, tangible outcomes. No, do it for the paper. No, we're going to do this because it's part of a philosophy about how we do work. In that sense, it was, we build these things because people need these things built. And so that I did take very strongly from that, very, very outcome, very practical focused. And that absolutely plays out in what was the next 20 years of my career.
There you go. So you literally grew up around someone that was a doer. That identified problems or was curious about the world and when it made things happen as well.
Absolutely.
That's a huge influence.
Yeah, absolutely. And the curiosity as well. And the idea of continual education and betterment, and we never stop. We always learn new things. We're always looking for new things in new areas. And even as a family, we would go on holidays, far more museums than I probably really liked at the time. But in retrospect, kind of they're really interesting because you're learning about new things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm interested here then. At this point, you've left Infosys and you've joined ANZ, as you mentioned, where you spent the next sort of 12 years. But you've built your essence of your career to that point on finding problems, finding rapid solutions, building fast solutions and delivering them. And then you've gone into this huge organization where from the outside looking in, you'd assume the ability to move that fast would be quite challenging. tell me a bit more about ANZ in your time there, because you achieved some incredible things, by the way. When I was looking at this, you were CIO of multiple divisions, head of transformation, I think at one point, program director, head of global delivery, some huge roles.
Yep.
So, tell me a bit more about those years.
So ANZ was not a career when I joined it. It was 12 months. It was let my wife have this experience of her company. If that works, great. If it doesn't work, then we were packing up and moving to the UK. So my wife's Irish originally. And so we're like, no, we're moving back to the UK, maybe to Canada, but not staying here. So I did the 1 year in a role that was wholly unremarkable. It was a relationship role, really just about being the gateway between tech and the business. And I can't say I did anything particularly remarkable in that first year. But what really helped was the role I took after that. The business had a really poor relationship with technology. There's a long, sordid history as to how that had come to bear, but the tech wasn't particularly good. It was very problematic, very unreliable. There was an upgrade which was unsuccessful, and again, there's a lot of sordid history with vendor management not being what it should have been at the time. And so I was brought into that role simply because I was different. I wasn't a long-term ANZ person. I didn't have a whole lot of cultural, political alignments to people who were there. The MD of the business asked for me to be appointed into the role because I would bring something different, and they just wanted different. That was really ultimately what it came down to, and I'm incredibly grateful to this day. Mandy Rashley was the MD, which is now at one of the other big four, and she took a huge leap of faith in having me appointed into that role because she just wanted someone who would think about things a little bit differently, who would be really open and receptive to feedback and wouldn't start with a defensive position of, no, everything's fine here, we're all great, but would come in with an open mind going, yeah, that's a real problem. We need to fix that. And what was fascinating, that first kind of role, actually what it really came down to was the openness between technology and business and almost a degree of honesty about the state of things we're at. And people had done odd things to become weirdly accommodating to the business, but in the end not helping them. Yes, we'll move this release to include that one last thing. Except they did that every Friday. So the releases never actually made themselves out to production. And they thought they were helping, but all of a sudden when you go, no, you've missed this release, we'll do it in the next one, and you start delivering a release on a monthly basis, the business are like, oh my God, this is amazing. We're getting all of these things. All we did was change one thing that says we stick to dates, stick to a commitment, and we tell people about them. So that first role was fantastic, and my next couple of roles really just came from that role expanding out. I would move up and kind of take over teams. I'd have an acting role that would expand out and become a permanent role, which was great.
So was that your kind of MO? Your career was built around going in as a troubleshooter?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I went from kind of the expanded one of looking after all of transaction banking, I went in to run a global security program. And that came about, I was on the steering committee on an acting basis. And I got fired up about something, and my boss said, so there's a restructure is being announced tomorrow. Your role is going. But we've got 3 roles running the major programs across the bank that we're able to appoint people in directly. Do you want that job running that program? And I'm like, yes, I do. He's like, okay. Announcement will go out tomorrow with the broad restructure.
Yeah, right.
That was it. And that role was a project that had been going for a while, had a bit of a turbulent history, really bad relationship with a vendor. Kind of was, the first release of this project will be in 3 years. 3 years. Nothing we do in technology should have a first release in 3 years. And even you think about SpaceX building rockets, the first release wasn't in 3 years. And so I just looked at it and went, yeah, this is not going to work. Let's get a good group of people together in a room and really actually say, back to the same experience I've had at Telstra, what's the actual problem we're trying to solve here?
Yeah.
And one of those was that it has to be done in a certain time frame. And so I was able to, running this security program, take the guys who were already there and really replan the project in a way that served the organisation really, really well. And as part of that, interestingly, we had to go to the CEO of the institutional division and say, we need to change the project sponsor. And you need to change the sponsor from someone in a business unit to you. And his response was, I'm happy to do that, but also I'm going to change the scope from Australia to the rest of the world. And so straight away it's like, and you can't have any more money. But that's the trade. But anyone gets in your way, let me know and I'll step in. And so I'm like, okay, Alex, I'll take that deal.
Yeah.
And I went back to the team and I said, right, so Alex is going to be the sponsor, but he's given us 2 conditions. One of them, we have to be finished by October. Everyone's like, oh, and this was, previously 3 years, and it's got to cost less than this. Everyone's like, okay. So the team came up with a plan, and they said, we can't do October, we can do November, but we can do 10 million. And I went back to Alex and I said, done, we accept your terms. By the way, I'll have it in February and it'll cost 12 million. And he's like, done. Great. That project delivered in October. It cost just over $10 million. It's a project there had been multiple attempts to do beforehand. And all that was to do with what's the real problem, empower the team, totally throw away every other expectation. We exited vendors and then brought individuals back from those partnerships. And that became kind of my career-making real moment at ANZ, because that was really turning around something that had global import and delivering that successfully and having, I think, the second most engaged team in technology from an engagement perspective. Like, the people everyone loved it, and I loved it. It was absolutely fantastic. And from there, I got asked to go and run transformation. There was a large transformation and outsourcing program. And so I was asked to go and fix that. Again, not the first person who'd been asked to fix that particular portfolio. And then after that, I was asked to go and take over another portfolio. Again, not the first person who'd been asked to transform that. And a lot of my time there was about taking existing teams who typically were really good people, but just giving them a much clearer sense of mission, a really clear focus on what we're trying to achieve.
So that's you kind of led me to my next question quite nicely. As I was listening to you talk, it's one thing to be able to understand a problem, develop a solution. It's another thing then to be able to take that and inspire and lead a team. So how did you learn, or where did you learn to become a leader?
I have absolutely no idea. Yeah. As a kid, I was a very introverted person. I really wasn't good with other people. When I got to uni and I started doing student politics and plays and so forth. The reason I ended up doing plays is I was part of a drama club, yes, a group of real serious nerds, all wanting to do a play, and someone turned around, the guy who wanted to direct it, who is now a theatre director, he turned around and said, Euan, can you produce this? People seem to do what you tell them to do, or will you ask them to do things? They have no problem with doing that. Can you produce something? Really? Seriously? Yeah, fine. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, it's because I'm the only accountant in the room and you need someone who can work out how the money works. But what it really came down to is I was organised enough about getting people to do things. I could get people to be engaged with that. And I never kind of really understood the craft of it at the time. It was just, I would ask people to do things and it would tend to work out. And I would say my first couple of roles in management roles and leadership roles in project management, I was interested in the discipline of project management, but leadership was not something I really focused on. It wasn't something I thought about. I didn't really think about myself as a leader. Kind of until one critical incident that I was on a project that I went away from a holiday, and whilst I was away, the project went off the rails. And the person who had stepped in effectively had broken an agreement with the client that I had brokered to make sure everyone was happy. And when I came back, that person was very good mates with the CEO, tried to have me take the blame for that. And my team stood up and under pressure from the owner of the firm, under pressure, stood there and said, this isn't Euan's fault. This is, the other person's fault. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the effect of leadership actually working. As I'm like, my God, these guys, they're willing to put their jobs on the line for me. I don't know what I did to earn that. I genuinely had not seen that. And that was the moment where I thought, I've actually got to start thinking about leadership a little bit more seriously. And it did.
Or maybe not. Consciously, we did a pretty good job.
I was doing an okay job, but that was the start of it. And after that, it became a much more kind of conscious part of my thought process. But yeah, that was not something that I ever intentionally came to. And then one day I realized, oh wow, this is a skill set.
It's interesting. I love this kind of concept that leadership is actually defined by followship.
Yep.
And that's what you just articulated. That team followed you, they had your back, they supported you because of what you've invested in them, right? Not through fear or consequence, because of respect for what you gave to them. Throughout your career, what leaders have you had that you've been inspired by?
So I find inspirational leaders to be kind of interesting. I've had good managers. In fact, I've actually had some very, very good managers. I've had some people who I thought were very good managers because they would give me a lot of freedom to go off and solve problems. Here, we don't want to know how you do it. Just make this go away. For a long time, they were my favourite sorts of bosses.
Yeah.
But there's been a couple of bosses that I've worked for who have really demonstrated that leadership. And the first one who I ever saw it and went, oh my God, that's what leadership looks like, was Shane Elliott, who's now the CEO of ANZ. So without any commentary about how he's running the bank, when he first became the CEO of the institutional division, he wanted to change some very fundamental things about the division. And to do this, he said, I want every team leader in the whole division to come to a session with me. Did them in groups of, 20 people. Half an hour where he'd present the new strategy. And that new strategy involved moving resourcing, moving money. I don't remember there being people laid off, but it was a fundamental change. And so we're going to focus on these 6 things, but here's why we're going to do it. And after you had gone and seen him as a people leader, you had 24 hours to communicate that to your people. And if you didn't do it, you had to go back and have another session with him because he wanted the message to go to everyone with freshness.
Wow.
And you think it's the CIO of a division and he's taking, probably 20 hours a week for 3 or 4 weeks to get this message out to the 10, 15,000 people who support him directly and indirectly. And he wanted that because he wanted people to have a consistent, clear, informed vision of where we were all headed. And I remember walking out of that session going, that is leadership unlike I have ever seen in a big company. And it really stuck with me that clarity of communication, that giving people that clear roadmap about here's where we are and here's where we're going and here's why. And most importantly, here's why we're not doing that thing that we've been doing. Here's why we're killing that project. To me, that was hugely inspirational and really informed how I took on other projects in that clarity. And I've had a couple of good technical leaders that I've worked with over the years who've been really good about kind of setting rules for people to follow around technical paradigms and so forth. But it's that sort of kind of leadership from the front that has always kind of really inspired me in terms of setting that clear vision.
It's interesting because it sounds like that start with why.
Yeah.
The kind of Simon Sinek, it was very clear with the why, very clear on that communication. I think it's one of the things Simon Sinek talks about, which is when you're bored of talking about the why, people have finally started to listen.
Yeah.
And it does need that repetition of communication and that clarity of communication, because that becomes important to really driving change.
I think also my leader at Judo, Lisa Frazier, who's the Chief Operating Officer there, she's been amazing in saying, here's the thing I want you to achieve. Here's the problem I want you to solve. And here's how it fits into the rest of what we're doing from a customer experience perspective and from a company value perspective. And I don't have a way set down that I want you to solve the problem, but here is what it needs to look like when we're done.
Yeah.
And that was incredibly powerful. She's an amazing leader. And incredibly supportive when you want to explore. I've got a couple of different opportunities on how we can do this. What do we think is going to leave us with the best strategic kind of outcome? And having a leader who can actually support you in those conversations, who can be that confidant before you then sit down with your team, I think that's also incredibly powerful. And Lisa's probably one of the first leaders I've had where that was a real kind of a real conversation about having real long-term strategic conversations. She's been absolutely amazing as well as a leader.
Yeah, fantastic. How did you know it was time to move on from ANZ? I was walking through Bangalore Airport. I tripped over and I had a major injury as a result. So I tripped over a damaged part of my spine, came back to Australia and ended up having to take several months off to try and look at non-surgical options. Ended up having major surgery. Took another 3 months off to recover from the surgery. And whilst I was lying in bed recovering, or actually getting ready for the surgery, I was like, when was the last time I was happy in my job?
And it was when I was running that security program I mentioned before. Good people, very clear ownership, very clear problem, really highly engaged team. And I had got to the point at ANZ where, without trying to be dismissive of my own role, it was steering committees and more than anything else. I'm like, running a large team, I felt that I didn't have the ability to really influence the way I wanted to. At a technical level, I wasn't loving the job. I thought, I've got to do something different. So when I came back into the office, there was a restructure. I'm like, you can deal me out, please. I want to go and do something else.
Yeah, great.
And I didn't know what that something else was. I was looking around and I was considering, do I want to try the civil service? And then I met someone who said, I've got an idea for a startup, but I don't know how to make it happen. Do you want to come on that journey? I'm like, hell yeah. When are you going to get that opportunity? So it's an interesting thing. Often we think about startup as things that you do when you're in your 20s. Yeah. You don't do them when you're in your 40s, when you've got 2 kids at private school. But this is an opportunity that I've left ANZ by choice because I want to go and do something different. This is the something different. And what's the worst that could happen? I could give this a crack. We could not get funding. And so in 6 months, that redundancy money is going to be gone and I'm going to have to go and get a real job. Okay, that's fine. Or it might work and we go for a year and a half and then I have to go and get a real job. Okay. Or it works and I can retire and I can teach people how to build robots and that sounds great too. And so I thought, I'm going to leap on that as an opportunity. So it was more that I just reconsidered where I was at with my life and thought that's what I want to change.
Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's Emmbr LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.